The 1972 action movie The Mechanic, starring Charles Bronson and directed by Michael Winner, is incredible for its engaging storyline, its fascinating main characters, sharp dialogue, efficient runtime, and strong philosophical themes weaved into its conventional action movie storyline. First time watching it in my teens, it blew me away, and still to this day, this movie continues to mesmerise me every time I watch it from start to finish. Upon rewatches of The Mechanic, one of the most curious details in the movie that I've always played with my mind is the film's incorporation of the surrealist imagery. All of these close-up shots featuring these images are from a famous triptych painting called The Garden of Earthly Delight by medieval artist Hieronymus Bosch. The Mechanic, on surface appearance, has a conventional thriller storyline, so the shots of these exotic and bizarre imagery stand out as unexpected and mystifying. They definitely mean something to the main character Arthur Bishop who stares at these paintings, otherwise why would he spend ages looking at them? And why have this particular painting lit? Though Arthur Bishop does offer Steve and us the audience more details of his backstory and his personal philosophy, it is very apparent that Arthur's living furnishing speaks more about Arthur's mindset than he lets on.
So this is what it looks like inside your head, huh?
That line, by implication, would mean that this Bosch painting, which Arthur has a particular fascination for, is reflective of his mindset, especially of how he perceives the world around him in his own walking existence. The Mechanic offers a lot of visual parallels to that effect. The best scene to start with is with the house party scene, supposedly celebrating Steve McKenna inheriting his father's house on the same day as his father's funeral. The place is swarmed with people partying about who toss soft toy animals and colourful balloons around. There's people eating food, life-size soft toy animals in bold, unrealistic colours, people making out, and at one point, a live pig. It's easy to say it's just a party scene, but let's draw parallels between this scene with Bosch's painting. Both the painting and the party scene have lots of colourful spherical objects. With the Mechanic movie, there are colourful balloons, usually in red and blue with some other colour shown. Meanwhile, the Bosch paintings have a lot of red spherical objects and some blue ones, and some of them appear to be edible fruits. The life-size soft toy animals being in the mix of the party guests with one live pig mirrors the presence of both animals and humans in the Bosch painting, a pig being one of those animals present too. And some of the human figures are shown carrying animals and other objects, just like the people tossing soft toy animals about in the Mechanic. The abundance of food in the house is reflected in the painting too, the strawberries being the size of a person. The colourful clothes that people wear, along with the colourful soft toy animals, reflect the colourful visual style of Bosch's painting, which itself looks like a celebratory party occasion. There is also a hippie playing a string-based musical instrument, which seem to parallel the string-based musical instrument on the right panel of Bosch's painting. And there is a bubble bath, which a party participant draws attention to.
It's all in the bubble.
Bubbles, which living creatures are encased in, are a visual feature in Bosch's paintings as well. As soon as I have drawn parallels between Bosch's painting and the party scene in the Mechanic movie in my recent viewing, the clear impression is that Arthur Bishop perceives his world like it's a Bosch painting. In an earlier scene, he goes past a knick-knack store which features visual distortion on a glass window, and he looks into a spherical object that visually distorts the environment around him with shiny reflections and colourful objects to the right. In the background, there are people tossing about a fish between them. It looks like a soft toy. Fishes are another visual pattern in Bosch's paintings, which include them being carried by people. In fact, images of the Garden of Earthly Delight painting are intercut with a shot of a killer whale in an aquarium setting. The fact that the marine life are shown floating in their tanks, defying gravity, this itself is a parallel with the Bosch paintings in that it shows fishes flying in the skies. Actually, the human figure upside down in water in Bosch's painting that has other human figures sitting by is sort of mirrored with Arthur Bishop's own childhood trauma.
Remember that fishing trip that you and me and your father took up to Canada? You was about 8, right?
7 or 8.
You fell overboard. You couldn't swim. Your old man says he'll learn pretty fast. You were flopping around. You looked like a drowned rat. But you didn't say a word. You didn't yell for help or nothing. You just kept looking at your old man. And he didn't make a move.
That was a long time ago.
There is a scene in a bird sanctuary or a zoo with lots of colourful birds seen about. A whole variety of species of birds are seen in Bosch's painting too. In the mansion of a very influential crime figure, I'm assuming he's a mob boss, his garden features a swimming pool with female statues around it, similar to this image seen in Bosch's painting. Bosch's painting features predatory animals eating their dead prey, with his lion eating his prey being a close match for the mob boss's own painting of a cheetah eating a dead animal. He has a pet cheetah too near this painting, suggesting a crossover between painting and reality, just like with the Bosch paintings being reflected in Arthur Bishop's life. The mob boss's dining room features statues of people holding flowers, and in the background there is a very artistic structure featuring characters holding up some kind of structure, quite reminiscent to these examples seen in Bosch's painting. The physical structures in Bosch's paintings, which are a fusion of rough organic structures with man-made architecture, reminds me of Arthur Bishop's own unusual house that blends conventional architecture with rough organic formations. There is even a shot here where the hovering flower-like lamp is directly positioned above Bishop, which isn't far off from the kind of imagery we see in Bosch's paintings. His paintings often have people being under the cover of some round object or being inside bubbles. Psychological bubbles, if you will. Actually, that kind of takes me back to this shot with the distortive portion of the window. Arthur being seen inside this circular bubble of sorts, positioned right above his head. That's brilliant composition. Arthur Bishop living alone in his own psychological bubble.
I live in my mind, Mr. Bishop.
Sounds like something I read someplace.
And so do you.
This is all really revealing about Arthur Bishop's mindset. He perceives life and death very differently to most people, which disassociates him from his world in the same way he looks at paintings. Bosch's paintings feature people who are as small as animals and fruit, as if casting the human figures as animals or insects, living their own world of life and death. At a push, being that we see fishes flying in the sky, it would also portray the human figures in the picture as being akin to marine life, the painting as a surrealist aquarium. There are pieces of dialogue in the film illustrating characters' cynical, indifferent, almost atheist position of life and death.
I've always been interested in primitive rituals like tucking the dead away.
Murder is only killing without a license. And everybody kills. Governments, the military, the police. All this, heroes. Half of them are killers. Napoleon was one, you know. Someone trained by me could be of value to you.
Nobody lives forever.
At the same time, I also perceive the abundance of people in these paintings and the wall murals in Arthur's own house as one of the giveaway signs that Arthur is lonely. He sees a lot of people being happy with their own lives as he walks by in his life, but up until halfway through the film, he never makes any proper effort into forming any kind of friendship. Because of his dangerous assassin profession and his morbid taste for murder, he is unable to relate to them, and he does not permit himself to allow others into his life. So these artistic depictions of human life sort of provide a substitute company, which isn't the same.
That's your expert opinion?
That's my opinion.
Okay, don't get uptight. Well, yeah, there is. What happened the other night? That was pretty far out, and you were saying some things about it.
So?
So how about some answers?
To what? Anything else?
Sure. It's a shooter. A hitman. So?
So there we are.
Other moments which add to the surrealistic nature of the story include Louise's house that features this stark tapestry of geometry, along with rocking horses and dozens of lit candles. There are also a few villains too, like that scene in the party scene. The mannequin museum scene with all of the garish, colourful lighting effects and spinning dotted lights. The historical and fictional villain mannequins are like three-dimensional versions of human figures seen in paintings. Steve even posits the thematic connection between these dummies and themselves.
Yeah, they're about as famous as our own honest-to-goodness heroes.
Don't tell me that's gonna make us heroes.
During the motorcycle chase, an easy-to-miss detail is that the pets rushing away in fear are two dogs and a cat that were sitting together and they run away in the same direction. I have known people who own both pets, cats and dogs, and those animals get along together well in real life, but it's a combination we don't culturally associate with, so this moment on screen feels unusual. An interesting notion to consider is how the mob boss's pet cheetah in this scene seems to mirror Arthur Bishop's own personal feelings about his life and the shackles placed on his life by his organization. Pay attention to the editing in this scene with the mob boss's dialogue to Arthur Bishop and the disgruntled sounds of a pet cheetah.
An organization survives only because its members are willing to sacrifice certain personal choices for the good of all. A very democratic principle, Mr. Bishop. We survive because we have this rule. What you or I want is unimportant. Only the rule.
It's worth saying as well that The Mechanic was directed by Michael Winner, who also co-edits some of his movies under aliases. This is also true with The Mechanic. Perhaps a shot which pans up from a painting of a cheetah to Arthur walking towards the mob boss while being visually framed is a suggestion of such. Arthur Bishop as a deadly predator. I'm not 100% sure of that though, because the reverse shot shows the mob boss framed this way too. And I noticed that Michael Winner's other movies sometimes has this visual pattern too, of characters being framed in between objects in the foreground. As a side note, the James Bond films features villains who have pet animals and precious framed paintings of people. Personally, I am tempted to consider this pattern to be a metaphor of a Bond villain's desire to own real people, and to have people kept in their places under the villain's pecking order. The villain Blofeld seems to even consider his pet cats disposable, if you watch the Bond films with that in mind. He only values cats as treasured objects to own, instead of regarding them as living beings to emotionally relate with. And I believe the same is going on with a pet cheetah in The Mechanic, which is being painted by its owner who can't even stroke it without having his hand bitten off. He's probably as emotionally separate to other people as he is to his own pet. So that was all the initial notes I had during my recent casual rewatch of The Mechanic. This all fascinated me, and I knew there was a lot more to this movie if I find out more about the story, so I hunted down the novelisation of The Mechanic, written by Louis John Carlino, who also conceived the story to begin with. This was published in the same year as the movie. Now, the original storyline treatment was said to feature an overt homosexual relationship between the main characters, but I have not seen that in the novelisation. And apparently, according to director Michael Winner in his autobiography, it was him who chose to shift the last act of the film to be filmed in Naples, Italy. And the Naples portion of the story turned up in the novelisation, so this book appears to be based on script drafts Carlino made when actor Charles Bronson and director Michael Winner became involved. Having glanced through the book taking notes, it features a lot of additional dialogue and thematic statements that are made more explicit than the movie version. It also included references to writers such as John Paul Sartre. It features written descriptions of Arthur Bishop being fascinated with perceiving his world in colourful ways, dreamlike states Arthur has even while he is on a job killing people, multiple mentions of abysses that Arthur stares at, perhaps referring to Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the abyss. And crucially, this book features additional references to Bosch's paintings. In the opening chapter of the book, where Arthur Bishop goes sea diving to hunt and kill a jewfish, that's what it's called in the novelisation, a jewfish, he drags it onto the beach. The novelisation describes of Bishop staring into the black eye of a dying jewfish, which initially reminds him of another triptych painting by Bosch called The Temptation of St. Anthony, at the bottom of the centre panel. Quote, its eye, black, shining, indicating with its stare. In the water, surrounding the fish, and in the sky above, a profusion of demons and witches. End quote. The mention of Bosch's paintings pops up again in the book when Bishop walks in an aquarium and has his anxiety reaction. Page 61 of the book describes of a group of people on the opposite side of an aquarium tank staring at the fish and at Bishop. From Bishop's point of view, as he's feeling really dizzy, the people's faces on the other side of the tank are visually distorted by the magnification of water, and, quote, superimposed over the fish and the distorted faces on the opposite side of the tank were the images of the fish-human demons in the Bosch paintings, end quote. A couple of additional thoughts on how the Bosch paintings relate to the novelisation. First, the left panel on the Garden of Earthly Delights at the bottom features a dark pond with marine life thriving in it. That reminds me of the opening section of a Mechanic novelisation, where Arthur Bishop travels down a dark hole underwater, finding all kinds of marine life as he hunts for a jewfish. The phantasmagorica of seascape, as the novel puts it. This underwater setting, quote, defied dimensions of time and space. It just was, continuing eternally, seemingly infinite, end quote. And second, this image of a huge pair of human ears which has sharp objects sticking through it, that brings to mind a moment in a novel where a target was killed in his sleep with a sharp object pushed through his ear into his brain. This was to do with a scene where Arthur and Steve infiltrate and kill their targets in the mansion. In the novel, it was night time and the key targets were asleep, but in the film this takes place in the daytime with the key targets awake. I think the change to daytime was done because the filmmakers wanted to throw in a motorcycle chase scene that was shot across different locations in the daytime during the film shoot. That chase scene was not in the novel. Moving on, let us explore the mechanic novelization's references to the concept of art generally. Aside from Bosch's paintings, the novelization describes of Bishop owning other prints and paintings made by Goya, Soutine, Bacon, and Doré, with specific titles such as Dorés's illustrations of the Inferno and Goyas's Christos de Guerra, which seems to be a mistake made by the screenwriter Carlino because I cannot find an item of that title online. When I tried searching on Google or Bing Christos de Guerra, the search engine instead brought up a series of sketches Goya did called Los Desastres de la Guerra, the Disasters of War. Goya also did artwork relating to Christos, also known as Christ. So Goyas's Christos de Guerra, as it was written in the mechanic novelization, would probably translate as Christ of War. That might relate to the mechanics' bizarre philosophical themes, which I might explore in another video. At one point, Arthur and Steve walk into a museum exhibiting kinetic sculptures. Arthur turns on the lit displays of one of these sculptures, but he isn't impressed. In the scene where drug dealers meet to negotiate delivery of drugs, the book version describes the scenery of old people playing crochet in a park as looking, quote, almost surreal, end quote. In Imobos's living space, which is different in a novelization, he actually lives in a castle-like fortress, and Arthur had to go down the elevator deep underground just to see him. Seems he's paranoid of being assassinated, maybe. But Imobos, instead of working on a painting of his pet cheetah, the book version describes him of working on an iron sculpture using welding torches and rods. And now here is a very revealing portion of a novelization. Pages 77 to 79 greatly expands on Arthur Bishop's philosophy to Steve about freedom of choice, and how important he believes that freedom to be if the actions individuals make are perceived as meaningful and purposeful. And part of that philosophy includes Arthur considering killing as an art form. Quote, even an act of killing can emerge as an art form if it is performed purely, without motive, since it stands beyond society's highest rule. Beyond it, totally free. Performed without motive is the highest art form man can know, because he uses himself as a medium of his expression. End quote. Okay, that's quite a revelation. That would explain why Arthur has swords, maces and so on adorned alongside his paintings, the artistic instruments of death. Funny enough, in a novelization, Henry McKenna nicknames Arthur as Art, artist Arthur Bishop. That would make sense since his last name Bishop is also a name for a chess piece, him being used by others in the crime world. So does Arthur consider himself akin to a recluse genius artist? That's what the novelization seems to be implying. That all brings to mind as well the concept of martial arts. It does not involve creating objects, it involves the perceived artistry and ingenuity of the combatants' physical agility and the intelligent melee tactics they use against their opponents. Page 59 of the novelization describes the Aikido classes Arthur attends to as having a ballet quality to it. And Arthur is fascinated with the concept of using your opponent's energy against himself, perceiving it as, quote, pure kinetic poetry, end quote. In the book version of a sparring match between two very highly skilled martial artists, page 75 of the book remarks on a lightning fast series of movements one of them makes as being like, quote, a strange white butterfly, end quote. And the book describes of Arthur looking like he's in a trance as he watches other people spar in their matches, almost like he's meditating. Actually, one form of martial arts that has overlaps with meditation is Tai Chi. That can be practiced alone in meditation or with others in combat. This kind of overlap occurs too with Bruce Lee's action movies, made around the same time as the original Mechanic movie. Bruce Lee's fight scenes often convey combative and meditative emotional states, Bruce Lee himself has described some of his fight moves as him moving and bending like water. And Bruce Lee's fighting choreography in his movies often have slow, relaxed body movements, followed by a sudden burst of lightning-fast attacks. The meditative qualities of martial arts are reflected with Arvis's own feeling of meditation as he prepares and kills his targets. The novelization did describe Arvis's feelings as being like dream states, like he's meditating. Take for example page 38 of the book after Arthur has killed Henry McKenna. Quote, his own car was hidden a short distance away in the cover of some shrub pines, and he walked to it. Once again in that sleep-like state, once again warm, centered in the Tao of it, yet knowing he would wake soon, very soon. End quote. Centered in the Tao of it, T-A-O. That is certainly a reference to the Chinese philosophy of Taoism. Arvis's artistic view of murder is somewhat shared by us too, in our civilized world. Page 125 of the novelization is a good example of this. Quote, scattered among the tables where people ate were elaborate and grotesque arrangements of dead fish, wired into fantastic shapes of boats, flowers, human faces. End quote. Yeah, we see this all the time where restaurants, supermarkets and advertisement promote food products with aesthetically pleasing visual imagery, but it doesn't change the fact that we are eating dead animals. I do eat meat, by the way, so I'm not going pro-vegetarian on all of this. And unfortunately, great pieces of art and inventions have been made in human history using elements of living beings. For example, elephants being hunted for their tusks, which were used for piano keys in the past. It wasn't the only reason, but there are a lot of sources outlining this history. Additionally, strings-based musical instruments historically use catgut, which comes from goats and sheep. And of course there is the fashion of people adorning dead animals, knowing they used to be living beings. It still goes on today, but thankfully animal rights groups have tried to discourage this. It's a simple fact that a lot of people do take fascination with violence, and sometimes we perceive artistry on this phenomena. Be it in action movies, horror movies, video games, nature documentaries and so on. In the context of warfare, we may say about how awful war is, how awful the Nazis were, or how barbaric the Vietnam War was. We may moan about the destruction and the chaos those wars caused, and rightly so. And sometimes we express desire for those wars to never have happened. But at the end of the day, we still love war movies about those very conflicts. It's like that Orson saying about how all of the gruesome wars of the past across the world have resulted in all of these marvellous works of art and insightful philosophical discussions, while peaceful Switzerland has only ever produced the cuckoo clock. That's humanity's relationship with violence and art. Even the popularity of the ancient Chinese book The Art of War demonstrates the universal concept of warfare in a philosophical presentation, as an art. I'm probably rambling at this point. There's actually a lot of discussions over the years of people trying to properly define the concept of art, but you get the point. Arthur Bishop perceives himself as akin to an artist while assassinating people, and he takes personal enlightenment in doing so. It's a lifestyle he's used to all through his life, but, as the novelization puts it, Arthur's lifestyle has impossible fantasy elements to it, and he knows it. He knows this life is empty. He knows there's more to life than what he has. He knows his time in life is running out, and it's possible that deep down he wants out of that lifestyle. Hence he befriends Steve, who becomes a son of sorts to him. And that's something the reclusive, very self-isolated kinds of people cannot create without stepping out of their door. Nearly finished now, just a few more points. In the novelization, after Steve comments on exploring Arvis's house as being like inside his head, Steve looks around Arvis's living space and at his books, trying to figure him out, which the novel describes as, quote, these extensions of his mind, end quote. As we know, or we should know, the contents of people's houses do reflect the thoughts of the people living in their houses or in certain rooms, including our own. In fact, there is a psychological topic studying people's drawings of houses and what those drawings in the fine details reveal about the drawer's subconscious thoughts and expressions. Fascinating topic. It's normally called kinetic house tree person if you want to look it up. In the prostitute's apartment, one side of the wall is adorned with a lot of movie posters, including an actress who resembles her and her clothes. It's quite appropriate that these movie posters featuring actresses reflect this character who play at a fantasy-devoted love interest role for Arthur Bishop as part of her services. Even people's clothes can reveal about what kind of people they are. Take the crazy woman Louise with her dressing gown. Her gown emphasizes verbal language, suggesting that Louise processes her understanding of the world through words. You know the psychology test people do to see whether they are a visual learner or an auditory learner or a kinesthetic learner? It seems specific for the filmmakers to have picked a personal dressing gown that features words. Last point now is a loose thought I have which I find interesting. As well as the idea that Arthur Bishop considers himself like he's a genius artist in his way, I would go further as well in thinking that Arthur considers himself like he is a work of art. With all of the Bosch-like imagery throughout the film, it's reasonable to posit the notion that Arthur Bishop is like a painted human figure wandering through the surrealist landscape he lives in. He sometimes stands like a permanent painted figure too, or a statue. People certainly do like to imbue themselves with artistic appearances, with all of the very decorative clothing, jewelry, tattoos, among other things. This is not just the fashion model types of people. Plenty of everyday people also do like to pose for cameras in ways that look aesthetically pleasing to them. An argument can be made that this extends to nature as well, such as the extravagant and beautiful looking peacocks and very colourful animal and insect species. However, their natural appearances tend to be underpinned by survivalist instincts and mating motives in their evolution. Hence you get animals and insects mimicking the faces of predatory animals to ward off other kinds of predators in the food chain. There's even a type of pufferfish that creates geometric art underwater, but again, the primary motive is said to attract mates. And last detail, as I mentioned earlier, Arthur Bishop the assassin is like an elegant predatory animal, just like the mob boss's pet cheetah. Just before I finish, as I was editing the first half of this video, I have checked out a couple of audio interviews featuring film historian Paul Talbot, who wrote a couple of books on Charles Bronson's movies. He was talking about the Mechanic movie and its production history, which is why I have looked up on him. And part of his discussions with his interviewers included his own observations of a Mechanic movie featuring visual parallels between the Bosch paintings with some other scenes of the movie. He only gave cursory thoughts which are nowhere as detailed as this video study, but I'm glad that he recognised this theme in the movie and that I'm not the only person to be saying this with this video. Well done to him, just thought I mentioned it. Okay, that's all I can say for now regarding the surrealist artistic qualities of The Mechanic, which I consider to be a very underrated movie in terms of critical evaluation. There are more that can be said about the movie's impressively efficient storytelling and its convoluted philosophical themes, and I might probably do video studies about those in the future. You have been listening to Movie Archaeologist. I do post these videos on YouTube as a hobby. People do watch my videos, but that's not the motive. It's to do with standing outside of it all, on your own. If you subscribe, I will teach you all I can. Out of that, you can choose how you want it to go. You in? There are alternatives to everything.